It's a great pleasure to be here and also to be back in Wisconsin. One of some of you might guess one of my favorite plants is Cannabis sativa, and Wisconsin has a special place in American history. Those of you might not know that. Hemp was the last. Wisconsin was the last state to grow hemp in 1957, kind of in the last era of hemp. And was a prominent hemp growing for the last 100 years. And also the North American Industrial Hemp Council, which helped kind of spawn the modern hemp movement over the last 20 years, and lobbying and educating people, was held in the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture's office under the Tommy Thompson administration. So it's good to be back here today. And I want to acknowledge my friend Gunnar, who really wanted to be here but couldn't make it. As a really good friend, and he started, which I think is the most financially successful food business in modern history, from startup to 18 months, 500 million valuation. Who does that? Is that amazing or what? And Thrive Marketplace carries, it's like Whole Foods online at wholesale prices with a Costco membership model. So they've done very well, and you can buy all sorts of products, including Nativa products. A little plug in there, but great company and really grown very well. One of these days you'll have to meet Gunnar. And I also want to thank Bill for not only inviting me, but also the corporate campus here and the environmental systems that I've observed, the living walls, the way they set the water systems up. The bamboo plates that were served last night, for food, and I go as a longtime environmentalist, I go to a lot of different events in different places, and really inspirational, and this is not the way a lot of companies do business, a real model for leadership. So thank you for that. So today I'm going to talk about the awe of nature, which is normally not my general topic. Again, Bill, he suggested, why don't you not give your regular talk? My regular talk is on sustainable agriculture, regenerative agriculture, the food system, and I'll get into some of that. But he asked, well, why don't you kind of stretch a little and look at what's kind of behind that? And so that's what we'll be talking a little today about. My journey as a young boy and kind of by observing nature, and then kind of what's happened over the period of time, and then also look at what's kind of inspired me, including Celtic mythology and understanding what was my grandparents, what did they live? What was their experience? What were they living like? And I think the challenges we're facing in the environment today is a lot has to do with our disconnection with nature, and especially those of us who are European descent. We seem to have that cord cut the most, in the world, and because it's been so long since we had that, we don't necessarily consider ourselves indigenous. You go down to South America, and people, maybe they're using computers and phones, etc., but their grandparents, lived in the forest, and it's been longer. So we're going to explore a little about that, and then talk about one of the areas that's my love is oceans and its relationship to soils and climate. So I found this slide recently, and shows someone really in harmony with nature, and really learning to get beyond just their own personal identity of who they are necessarily, and I thought this was a great way to kind of express that. And how many of you have been like on an ocean or someplace in nature where you just kind of felt like the presence of nature just kind of coming into yourself, into your being? Great quote from Emerson. And then we can look at it not only just in nature and our personal connection to nature, but also in business. How many people know who John Fullerton is? He was a managing director for a little banking company called J.P. Morgan. Very successful financial career. Retired, I think over 10 years ago, founded the Capital Institute. It's a great quote he has. "The universal patterns and principles the cosmos uses to build stable, healthy, and sustainable systems throughout the world can and must be used as a model for economic system design." So, we've created this industrial system. There's a lot of benefits. I mean, phones and computers, and we can fly on jets and do all these different things. But there's also this thing called nature, and we've seemed to have forgotten about that. And so now, as we're approaching, 7 billion people on the planet, on the way to 8 perhaps, we need to pay more attention to these things. And so this is a great quote, and encourage people to learn more about the Capital Institute, merging business, finance, and respect for nature. So natural systems thrive because they're regenerative. Yet we've designed degenerate food, energy, and water systems. And here's an example of a cornfield. Where's that soil going? So do you realize right now we have less than 60 years of topsoil on the planet? So what are we going to eat if we've lost all of our topsoil? We're going to download that from an app? I don't think so. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe there's some people out there who are working on that. I haven't seen that quite yet. And not only is the soil concerned about how we're growing, the food, but it's also, this is a theme that in the last 2 years, I've laser focused on this. I've been an advocate for over 25 years of organic, learning about organic, and wrote a book called Backyard Composting in 1991 and set up home composting programs all over the country. But what I've learned is looking at the question is industrial agriculture relying, when I say industrial, relying on petrochemicals, nitrogen fertilizers, biocides, is it destroying our oceans and oxygen supply? And so we're going to get into that a little. And if that's the case, it's time we need to change our food system. But first, we need to kind of discuss an uncomfortable subject that is now kind of coming to forefront in politics today. And I think it's interesting the fact, regardless of what you might think of either of these candidates, but the leading Republican candidate and on the Democratic side that's creating the most excitement, both of those candidates, Sanders and Trump, are drawing interest because of the concern that the system is gamed. Regardless of whether their policies are effective or not, it's just interesting to note. And you wouldn't have seen that 5 years ago. So Thomas Jefferson is one of my heroes, and I think we can learn from some of the things. And here's a great quote: "The end of democracy and the defeat of the American Revolution will occur when government falls into the hands of lending institutions and money and corporations." And as a longtime environmentalist and advocate, and also an entrepreneur, so I'm as much as an entrepreneur as I am, as an environmentalist, I've realized that the Wall Street has really gamed the system, and some of us are willing to acknowledge it a little more than others. And until we address that fundamental issue, a lot of the ways we want to live on this earth and the ways we need to protect the environment will be thwarted until we deal with this, which can be a bit of a depressing view because Wall Street is so powerful. They control. It's like there's always people always say, well, isn't Clinton and like Obama, aren't they like liberal and more progressive? But they are to a degree maybe versus a conservative president. But when it comes to Secretary of Agriculture, I like to joke, Monsanto is the one that chooses. They give them a short list, or maybe so it's like Monsanto and Dow say, here's a few Secretary of Agriculture. They're not going to nominate someone that's going to focus on regenerative agriculture and building soil and fertility. It's going to be something that's going to be friendly. You can go to the Treasury Secretary and go all down the list. So we really need to deal with this because it's going to impact how we deal with policies and how we're going to change the world. And not that all big corporations are bad. And matter of fact, we need to transform some of these corporations, and we're going to talk about some corporations that were maybe kind of behind the times and are now moving forward in some interesting ways that you might find of interest. So let's, now we've left the corporate world there for a bit. Now let's go back into the natural world. So how many people have heard of biomimicry? Great. That's, not many audiences are that knowledgeable about that. But so we can, basically a design inspiration from nature. So you can, build systems, buildings, houses, with living walls, an example of that here, that they have here at the company headquarters. So we can draw inspiration from that. So a little about my journey. So this is me on the right. At age 7, I was a crabber from a young age, and I was on this is on an island called Clark Island in the west part of Vancouver Island in Canada. And so, some people, like to collect, rare coins or, art or, muscle cars or whatever. My parents happened to like to collect remote, beautiful islands in the Pacific Northwest in the United States and in Canada. So when I was 2, they bought a 3-acre island called Coon Island. How many people have been to Orcas Island? Are you familiar with that? Some of you have. So we bought that little island. So pretty much from about age 2 to 14, I spent a couple months a year within 30 feet of the ocean, without electricity, without running water, living very remotely, and spent a lot of time in nature around trees and watching the tide pools, and that was like my world. No TV, none of that. And then 10 months a year near Pasadena in Southern California, one of the most smoggy cities in the world at the time in the 60s. It was hard to breathe, during, like when it was a summer day or a warm day. I'd go out and play. And so that kind of going back and forth between this industrial reality. I mean, we had a nice house, but it was a very, polluted environment, and then going to a place where it was totally an environmental bliss. So those two worlds really kind of help change things a bit for me, and the way I see the world a little differently. So this is me at about maybe 13 on another island called Crane Island. My dad got tired of hauling water to one of the islands by boat for drinking water, so we bought a piece of another little island. And so this is a Dungeness crab. That over there is the rock crab. So I started. I had 4 crab pots, and I was in the crab business and could make about $80 a night on a good night when I was 13. So started my entrepreneurial career, and then I actually had about, this was like my 5th business by the time I was 13. I also had a coin business. I got in the rare coin business and started collecting coins, and that was I got adopted by a father and son Jewish coin dealer. Kind of took me under their wing, and I learned a lot. I learned, I think, more there in a couple of years than maybe I could have gone to Harvard, which my brother went to Harvard. But but at a young age, I decided I didn't want to go to college. I was lecturing my dad at 12 that I wasn't going to go to college, and so when I was like 20, instead of going to college, I took a few classes actually. I thought maybe that would be, maybe just try that a little. But I spent most of the time in libraries for about 3 or 4 or 5, 6 hours a day. I went to libraries and just read every periodical that I could find, from business to science to advertising, etc. And then another event that happened when I was 20, they dumped nuclear waste 9 miles from my house in an unidentified truck driver, and that's when I kind of set me off into like my journey in life is just to understand how we live and how can we pollute less and live more in balance with nature. In 1999, I founded Nativa. So this is a book that I helped write called Hemp Foods and Oil for Health, and my first hemp bar. And at the time, things were looking pretty good. And then a few months after, the DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration, didn't really like what we were doing. So they tried to say they tried to say we shouldn't be selling hemp because they thought it was a drug crop. Hemp's still a Schedule 1. And then there was kind of some back and forth in '99 and 2000 with the media and trying to stop our products getting in from Canada because we couldn't grow it in America. So And I started with hemp because it's an alternative instead of cutting down trees to build houses. So I was drawn to hemp for its environmental perspective, but then got into the food aspect because that was the way I wanted to create markets in Canada. And then in 2001, about 2 weeks after 9/11, they published in the Federal Register that hemp foods were in the same category as heroin. And so I had the Bush administration and bearing its full weight down upon me in the Federal Register. It's like, if you continue on this, you're going to be, facing, 10 to 15 years in jail, crossing state lines, multiple products, what have you. So I said, well, okay, well, I'm doing $10,000, $12,000 a month, pretty small company, didn't have any money for lawyers. So I decided, okay, I got to get some people to help me. So I got Dr. Bronner's. They were $6 million. They were like big size company. But then we got Nature's Path, and they joined us. And so then we sued in 2004. We won in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. HIA. It was Nativa versus the DEA, but then it became HIA, which is the Hemp Industry Association, as a kind of collective effort. And so, I actually fought the government and won. So I was pretty jazzed. That's why hemp foods are legal. But we still can't grow hemp legally. You can grow it for research purposes in a few states, but we'll get into a little more about that. So here's some of our products. Mentioned we focus on hemp, coconut, chia, and red palm oil. Pioneered hemp foods. Got into coconut when most people didn't even know what coconut oil was. They thought it was caused heart disease, and now coconut oil is pretty. A lot of people. How many people use coconut oil? Okay, that's great. So a lot of people. If this was when I first introduced it, there was like people had never heard of it. And we have some interesting new products, and we're kind of shifting. Our business model has been chia in a bag, coconut oil in a jar, single ingredient items, which when they were hard to get, and that was a good business model. And now we've been so successful that we have hundreds of competitors now. So that's a good thing, because now more people have access to it. But for our customer and our cash flow, that's more of a challenging thing. So we've introduced what we call value-added items. So the jar in the middle is a plant protein superfood 30 shake that we introduced. So 30 superfoods, not only hemp and chia and coconut, but we have moringa and baobab and hawthorn berry and reishi mushrooms, and it's a new product we're excited about. And then how many people like chocolate? All right, good. So we have an organic, vegan, lower sugar than the leading national brand that's just coming out. It's fair trade palm oil. We also have coconut and chia in it, and 5 times the amount of fiber. So we're just launching that. So we're pretty excited about that. And that'll be and one of the things we do at Nativa that's a little different than some companies, but similar to what Patagonia and now Cliff Bars, we donate 1% of our sales that groups promote sustainable agriculture. So we've given away $3.6 million as a company to date. Thank you. And this is a project that's kind of near and dear to my heart. These seedlings are actually grown in Orcas Island right now with some permaculture folks. And we're gonna donate 750 seedlings to farmers and ranchers on the West Coast to help people to go into more agroforestry and value-added crops. And chestnuts is a great crop. Just a lot of people grow it in the West Coast. And they've had a chestnut disease, a blight, as you might be aware of. And that's some of the seedlings there. This is me in the Philippines. We also have a program with our farmers. We've created nurseries in the Philippines and distributed over 100,000 coconut seedlings. And you plant that tree, and 5 years later, it's a money tree for the farmers. And the average farmer has maybe 200 or 300 trees that they grow in the Philippines. So we've been working on that for a long time. So proud to do that 100,000. Hopefully we can do more of those. And that's where we get most of our coconut in the Philippines, and then some in Sri Lanka and some in India. And we've definitely had some challenges weather related. You all might be aware of that major typhoon that hit about 2.5 years ago. Unfortunately, 6,000 people died, destroyed a lot of homes and things. Through our fair trade program, we were able to use some of those funds to rebuild the roofs from the farmers, because we pay a premium to the farmer that goes into a fund for that. Also, the challenge for us. 40% of the coconuts of our organic farmers were knocked off the trees, so we had 40% less supply. And then the processors said, well, now the costs are up, so we need to charge you 40% more, but you get 40% less. So we were $2 million a month out of stock. Then just right when we came out of that, when there's more supply available, then they had a port shut down the West Coast. It was at 50% capacity for 9 months. That was like, it's like in a fight, like someone came in and hit you, and then you're down on the ground, then they come in and just kick you right in the side as hard as you could. That almost just pretty much made us go, because it's about 2/3 of our sales, you know. So you imagine, if those of you in business, imagine when your gross margin just goes, you know. So definitely some lessons in business, and it was a very intense typhoon. It just so we've diversified our supply, and hopefully we'll you know, but you have to deal with these weather events. So this is me in a chia field in northern Peru, and I entered the chia business. How many people have eaten chia seeds before? Okay, great. Wow, you guys are the plant people here. So this is me in the field, and so chia. I've been hearing about chia for many years, and a lot of my friends said, when are you gonna start selling chia? You're in the hemp and you're in coconut. So we started in chia, and in 18 months we were the #1 selling chia company, organic chia company, and we kind of controlled the market. We had like about 2,500 tons on the market, and the prices were really hard to get. And this was an example, though. These are little these are seedlings they're replanting in the field there. And a month later, they had like a 100-year event and wiped out the whole field. I had to discontinue one of my SKUs, and it was just, you know. But this trip to Peru was a memorable one. Our partners there said, well, you know, we're going to take you up to you know, the Machu Picchu and Cusco, and then I said, well, if we're going to go up there, I want to see a shaman. Let's you know. You know, I'm a California CEO, and I've spent time around shamans and learned from indigenous people, and so we took off and went to a little village, and we said, well, where's the shaman today? He said, oh, he went to town. I guess I didn't get, you know. And I said, well, our folks were there. They said, well, is there anybody else there? They said, well, there's like a daughter of a curandero. You know, they wouldn't call her a shaman, but you know, it's like she's the daughter of a shaman. And so we talked to her. She says, come back in a few hours. Or 6 hours, I got to prepare. And so we came back, and you know, I kind of did this first, and there was a friend of mine that's now our CEO in the company, and it's kind of an interesting story, kind of what happened to him with this. So she gives me a bunch of coca leaves, and she says, you know, just pick. There's this bag. Just pick these out, and which ones you kind of feel connected to, and you know, she's kind of just doing these different things, and it was an interesting. You know, there was no substance involved. She was just kind of talking to you, and you know, kind of asking some questions. And so I was kind of wiped out. I kind of went back into the car after a couple hours, and then my friend went in, and he was kind of like, he'd never, like, he's from the Western Prairies in Canada. You know, this is not his kind of world of going to see a shaman, and you know, like, you know, he was just, organic foods was kind of a new thing to him. So he was like, what's this, you know, going on, you know, and then later, you know, I said, how was it? He says, because he was like, you know, well, it's kind of interesting, you know. And then the next day, I said, so what's going on? He says, my leg is so amazing. I said, oh, you mean that leg you injured in hockey? You almost like you had to put a pin in, and you broke it, and it was like, I mean, it was throbbing pain for a year and a half. Hasn't felt pain since then. So, you know, and she just went, I said, what happened? She said, is there something wrong with your leg? Because he didn't say anything to her. Yeah. And then she put, like, you know, he could just really feel this heat and energy onto the leg. And it's like, I mean, I don't, like, he tells his parents are like, whatever, you know. You know. So, you know, that's my story in Peru with this amazing woman shaman. So does anybody know what this is, this plant here that's growing in the this is duckweed. Duckweed is a common plant, tradition from Thailand. And this was taken at UC Davis. I was presenting at UC Davis to some of the students, and I thought that was interesting. It's like, here we are, like one of the leading, agricultural universities in the world, UC Davis. A lot of experts, etc. And one of the most nutritious foods in the world is growing in their canals, and nobody's even observing. They're not making that connection. And I think that's kind of like a metaphor for what's going on in our universities. I may share some things a little today that some people may not necessarily agree with, or maybe you're going to maybe upset a few people. Maybe not. Some of you will be going right on. Other people going, maybe that's going a little too far with that, John. But that's part of my role. I kind of tend to try to push the envelope, for better or worse. So I'm actually involved in a company advising company called Green Onyx. And duckweed doubles every 48 hours. It's one of the most, it's complete protein, great spectrum of minerals, and they're working on a plan that's Israeli R&D technology to grow it in indoor systems. So imagine you can have a product that doubles every 48 hours. It basically just needs sunlight and a small amount of nutrition, which I happen to connect them up with a new technology to take I can't tell you a lot about it, but taking like what's considered a waste product and turn it into a liquid certified organic fertilizer. So I connected them up together. And also at college campuses, do you know that there's virtually no bees in college campuses? They don't have bees in college campuses. Why do you think that's the case? Because they're just spraying. They're just spraying everywhere. So we're bringing up our next generation leaders in a sterile, biologically devoid environment. You think that's a good idea? So now we're going to get into a little Celtic mythology, and there's a book called The Way of the Weird that W-Y-R-D, and another Peruvian shaman actually recommended that book to me in my 30s. And it tells the story. I think Brian Bates is the author. So if you're interested in Celtic mythology, it's a great book, and it tells the story of two worlds, of the original Celtic inhabitants in Britain, and then the first Christian priest, Catholic priest that came over, and their kind of journey together. And it's not like one is better view or the other. That was what I really liked about it. They kind of came together, and I try to understand, like, well, what is this Celtic culture? And the Celtic culture, just like in other indigenous cultures from Africa or Mexico, et cetera, have a great love of nature, and that's really been separated from us. And so I wanted to learn about that. And so part of they came up with the name of the book, the Weird. There's these weird sisters, three weird sisters, kind of represent they kind of the keepers of the fate, the destiny of the world, and it's kind of a mythology. And it's just to just show you a little of that. And so in that our ancestors long time ago, the idea that we would be spraying chemicals to kill all the bees and all the wildlife is such a foreign concept. But unfortunately, because of the when the Roman Empire came in and kind of like conquered a lot of the whether it was Gaul, which is now Spain, and France, and in Germany, and then they set up a kind of authoritarian, and a kind of a not honoring nature system that we've been cut off from that for a long time, and that's part of the reasons why we're in such a situation today. And now there's also a male version of their culture is the Green Man. How many people know about the Green Man? So it's a Celtic mythology, and interestingly, the first time I went to Switzerland in 1995, I actually saw the Green Man on a building in Switzerland, in Bern, Switzerland, that was built like in 1300. So that was interesting to kind of see that symbol, again, someone who's connected with nature and honors nature. And I've also had a chance to spend some time around the Lakota Sioux people. I used to listen to Black Elk a long time ago, and I've been on the reservation, Pine Ridge, which is a very challenging situation there, over 90% alcoholism rate. But the Lakota Sioux Lakota is great tribe. And I really like this quote from Lakota Chief Luther Stanley Barrett, which I have in my book, Backyard Composting. I included that back in 1991. The Lakota was a true naturist, a lover of nature. He loved the earth and all things of the earth. The soil was soothing, strengthening, cleansing, and healing. And as someone who's ancestors came from Wales and England and France. I always really connected well with different cultures. But I remember we don't necessarily have to learn to be an Indian or learn to whatever. We need to tap into what our ancestors are and honor that. We can learn from all those different cultures. So we're going to get into a little about soil and a little about some of the things that are going to determine what life is going to be like in the next 50 years. And I'm going to share some things that may be a little hardcore, and some things that maybe you have a sense are happening, but we're going to kind of dive into that. So this is a great quote, Franklin Roosevelt: "The nation that destroys its soil destroys itself." There's the Sahara forest. That's what they used to call it. Now it's the Sahara Desert, because they destroyed it for making ships for the Roman Empire. So 2 years ago, I started getting involved in the regenerative agriculture movement as a way to deal with climate change. So Tom Newmark, he's the founder of the Carbon Underground Project. Tom Newmark's a very dynamic business guy, has a ranch, and he was the founder of one of the top executives of New Chapter, the supplement company. So this is a very apropos quote. "Many NGOs view agriculture and carbon as the enemy. The regenerative agriculture movement sees carbon as our friend and agriculture as our natural ally to help carbon return to the land." So ironically, the major environmental groups today, Greenpeace, Sierra Club, 350.org, they're environmentalists, but to be frank, they don't understand ecology. It's kind of ironic that the leading environmental organizations don't understand ecology. And it's natural systems, and it's part of our, they're concerned about things, but they don't necessarily make that connection. So they're putting 99% of all their focus on, what do we say? Leave it in the ground. That's the disinvestment campaigns. That's what they're educating. Chevron and Exxon are the problem, and we need to just go to wind and solar as fast as we can, and that's the solution. And that's what they've been saying for 25 years. Is it working? No. It's a failed system. It's a failed plan. Now, do we need to shift from coal to solar and wind? Yes. And we're doing that? Yes. But that's only 50% of the issue. The other 50% is, what are we going to do with all the carbon that's in the atmosphere that's now floating down into the soil, and floating into the oceans. So we have all this carbon, and then once it goes into the oceans, what happens? Yes, and so that's a big issue. So looking at the current story, the planet's getting hotter. And solar and wind is the answer. And that's a part of the answer, but that's what we've been hearing. That's what you hear in the media. That's what they talk about the climate. When they went to COP21, that's what they were talking about. Can you imagine at COP21 in Paris, oceans and soils were not on the agenda? Those are two of the biggest carbon sinks in the world. We're not even on the agenda. I wrote an article that was very critical of that. In EcoWatch, and you can, if you want to, some of the different articles I've written over the last year are there, and there's a reason why that wasn't on the. Anybody has any idea why that wasn't on the agenda? Because the most powerful corporations in the world, including Monsanto and DuPont and Dow, don't want it to be on the agenda, so it's not. We're an ocean planet. We're not a land planet. So how can you have a global meeting on the climate and not talk about the oceans? Hello? I didn't need to get a degree in science to figure that one out, right? So the news story is the oceans are becoming acidic, and they didn't actually even mention. You don't even read about ocean acidification up in the media up until this last year. And I think there's only one person running for president that's actually mentions ocean acidification. We all know who that is, right? Bernie. And so I like to say, well, we have this challenge with all this carbon in the atmosphere, oceans are going acidic, and if we don't solve this, a lot of species are going to be leaving the planet very quickly. Not 2100, we're going to have to worry about the oceans rising a couple feet. We're talking about a mass extinction. So we have a new app, though, and that app is Regenerative Agriculture. So we can take that carbon from the atmosphere, we can take it's in the oceans, and we can put it below our feet. The solution is literally under our feet. And the question is, do we have the consciousness, do we have the organizational ability and the fortitude to deliver on that? So a couple little stats. 30% of all greenhouse gas emissions are attributed to agriculture. If you go to the Department of Agriculture in the United States, what do you think they tell you this number is? Anybody, any idea? 9% or 13%. They're underrepresenting the number massively. And any idea why they're doing that? I think you already know. Yeah. Largely attributable to animals and nitrogen fertilizers. 92% of farmland is devoted to animal production and emits by far the most greenhouse gas emissions. Do you see that in the media? Are they talking about this? Even the environmentalists don't talk about this. So how are we supposed to shift? How are we supposed to shift society if our government won't talk about the problem and our environmental groups won't talk about the problem? So that's a question I've asked. And the good news is 2 years ago when I started on this journey about this specific application with regenerative agriculture, very few people were talking about it at all. And it was very depressing. I was like, is this mad? It's like we have the solution and no one even talks about it. Nobody in the organic food industry talks about it. We're in the organic food world, and we have a great way to show the betterment of our systems. And so the good news is we've made significant progress in the last 18 months, a lot. There's a lot more awareness. How many people, raise a hand, know about this connection and are aware of this? Okay, that's, again, a pretty informed audience here. So, so a little about some of the soil, and then we're going to get into some of the ocean, a little about some of the things here. Regenerative organic agriculture, not just sustainable. Sustainable means you sustain it along, but we actually want to regenerate and increase the tilth of the soil, increase the carbon, the organic matter into the soil. So we want to regenerate the systems, not just sustain the systems. How do we do that? We want to maximize carbon fixation, and the soil can take so much carbon. In fact, there's some people joke, if we do our job too well, we could go into an ice age. We could take so much carbon in the atmosphere that we could go to 200 parts per million. Right now we're at 400. We could easily go to 350 parts per million or 300 parts per million in 1 decade if we focus on it. And we can reverse the greenhouse effect. But how many people, again, we don't hear that. It's just like, you know, you really think India and China are going to cut their greenhouse gas emissions, next year? You really think that's going to happen? Do they have like what, 7 times the amount of 10 times the amount of people we have in the United States? It doesn't matter what we do if they're just going to continue to burn coal, etc. But if we can get them all involved in regenerative agriculture systems, and China's already demonstrated they can plant lots of trees and regenerate some of the deserts. If we can get them involved in doing that, then we have a chance to create a livable, workable planet. So just to understand, or to recap, organically managed soils can convert carbon CO2 from a greenhouse gas into a food-producing asset. So we can take what's a problem, too much carbon, and turn it into the solution. And what happens when you put carbon into the soil? Anybody have any idea? The soil retains more water. That's pretty good in droughts. In California, we've got some issues there, right? And many other states. So it retains more water. And also it reduces the need for fertilizer and makes more nutrient-dense food. So we can conserve water and create more nutrient-dense food, and we've taken something that we have too much of, and that's a problem. An elegant solution, right? So a little about some of the 5 principles of this soil health. And our Natural Resource Conservation Service, part of USDA, and they're like soil evangelists. They're going all over the country. They have an online application you can download, and they are doing great work all over the country. A lot of people don't know about them. So one is composting and cover crop. We need to add more compost. Cover the soil. You don't want soil barren. You want to plant cover crops. We could be doing so much in the Midwest here. Instead of, how many people see, you drive by a cornfield, and during the winter time, you don't see, it's just all barren. And then, we don't want to see that. You don't want to expose that soil. And so we can do in cover crops. And more farmers are doing that. It's increasing. Imagine if we took the USDA farm subsidy program, we said, all farmers, if you get 50% of your subsidy for doing what you're doing right now, we're not going to change it overnight exactly, but the other 50% you get if you go on a program to put carbon into the soil. What would happen if we did that? Would that change overnight? And farmers are, they're very practical people, and and sometimes they're a little slow. Sometimes to change new systems, but once they get into it, and that's already starting to happen. But we need to figure out a way to monetize that, and that'll be one of my other slides we'll be talking about in a minute. Also, we want to minimize soil disturbance, so not over-tilling all the time. So that's important. And we want to maximize the diversity in the soil. What happens when you spray Roundup and other chemicals, other herbicides into the soil? Do you think the earthworms like that? All the studies show the earthworm populations decline. Yeah. But for some reason, that doesn't seem to get in the media when they have this discussion about GMOs and industrial agriculture. One thing to understand is 98% of all genetically modified crops sold in the world are designed so you can not only just spray, you can spray Roundup, a toxic herbicide, right on the plant while it's growing. And they sell more herbicides that way. A lot of people don't understand that. Also, we can integrate livestock on the land. How many people think cows are the problem? Okay, well, if we're in California, there's more vegetarians, there'd be a lot of hands up. So cows are part of the problem because they're involved in industrial agriculture, concentrated feedlots. They're like concentrated feedlots worse than like a coal-burning power plant in terms of what it does to the environment. Again, you don't hear that so much. But cows that are done on a holistic grazing, where you move them in one area for like about 3 or 4 days, and then they move them again, can regenerate the soil. They can increase the root growth of the grasses and take that carbon and sequester it. So cows are literally they're like the solar panels of regenerative agriculture, but it has to be done in a managed way, and it's kind of basically mimicking like the buffalo. And if we had more buffalo, we could use buffalo instead of cows, but we don't. Unfortunately, we only have so many buffalo. So, but it takes more time and more focus to do this. And also, when you eat meat from pasture-based meat and dairy, the omega-6, omega-3 ratio is about a 1-to-1 ratio. When it's grain-fed, it's like a 5-to-1 ratio. And the number one cause of inflammation in the world today, in my view, is that we've gone to industrial agriculture, and the majority of our diet is from corn and soy. And so traditionally our diet was around 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 of omega-6 to omega-3. And omega-3 is what you get in fish and flax and hemp. And now the average American is around 10-to-1. And if you're in a lower income area where they don't have access to fresh food, it's more like 15 or 20-to-1. And why is that important? Because the omega-6, omega-3 ratio impacts your brain function, your heart function, your hormonal function, your skin function, and your cellular function. You think those are important to your health? We've created a food system that essentially is pro-inflammatory by having all these. So we need to diversify our crops and our diets and get to a healthier lifestyle. So remember I talked a little about Wisconsin and hemp. Here's a 1918, a great quote. Hemp has been demonstrated to be the best smother crop for assisting the eradication of quackgrass and Canadian thistle. And hopefully we'll be growing hemp again in Wisconsin soon. They're growing a couple thousand acres in Kentucky. I was just down there last month, a couple months ago, on a talk on organic agriculture in Kentucky growing hemp. And interestingly, 10 days before I arrived at that talk, the USDA says they're not going to certify organic hemp. So all the hemp that's being grown in Kentucky organic, I can't sell under that. So maybe the government still got some issues there. I don't know. So that's another battle we got to deal with, It's like, how many people compost? Wow, that's awesome. So compost, it's the circle of life. We can take what is, a byproduct of what we think is waste. Waste is I look as a verb, not a noun. I really don't like when people say, oh, that's yard waste, or, it's a resource. It's only a waste if we waste it. And back to this question, how do we monetize conventional farmers for using regenerative practices? This is the number one practical issue. If you want to have a planet to live on, you better get involved in figuring this out. Because growing organic, and I'm as big a fan as organic, only 0.7%, less than 1% of acres is organic in America today. And in 5 years from now, we'll be lucky if it's 1.2%. There's a shortage of organic, and farmers are not switching. We've got to figure out people who are not organic and get them to be more regenerative on the pathway that is more organic, but we got to figure out a way to do this. And changing policy in Washington, D.C. is going to be important, but we're not going to do it if we send leaders to Washington, D.C. that are just going to nominate Monsanto's nominee for U.S. Secretary of Agriculture. It's not going to happen. Sorry. Washington, D.C. is not about logic and reason. As I learned lobbying there about hemp in the 90s. I just said, I got to give up this lobbying thing in Washington, D.C. and go build a company and create demand for hemp. And that's what I did in 1999. And now we're going to grow it because why? Because the farmers are demanding to grow it because they saw the demand from the Canadian farmers. And that's where we import our hemp. So let's talk about a couple huge, giant multinational corporations, General Mills and Campbell's. 5 years ago, the concept for them being involved in organic agriculture was like, are you kidding? General Mills, and I've had two major campaigns with these companies. We'll get into the GMOs a little, but I founded a nonprofit called GMO Inside, and we partnered with Green America, which put on the Green Festivals, and so we've done some very high-profile campaigns to change agriculture, and one of them was with General Mills. We put 50,000 comments on their Facebook wall about their Cheerios had GMOs in it. And after those 50,000 comments in about 14 months, they decided to label their products. Decided to take out their GMOs in Cheerios, and now they're actually going to voluntarily announce and label their products. That's a big move. Here's some of the companies that General Mills recently acquired in Campbell's with Plum Organics. So who's responsible for GMO safety? What do you think? Is it the FDA or Monsanto? Anybody have a guess? Here's a quote from Monsanto. Monsanto should not have to vouch for the safety of biotech food. Our interest is in selling as much of it as possible. Assuring its safety is the FDA's job. That's what Monsanto says. What do you think FDA says? Ultimately, it's the food producer is responsible for assuring safety. So all these GMO foods that are approved, they're with self-submitted studies. This is the same company that said, Agent Orange is not toxic. And they sprayed it over the jungles over Vietnam, and now we have our veterans, with all the diseases. You know how many Superfund sites Monsanto's created in the world? And they're in charge of determining the health and safety of our food supply. They're also in charge of the genetics as well. If you may not know this, they bought up most of the seed companies. And when they buy these seed companies, they tend to throw out about 80% of the germplasm. They just get rid of it. They go, we're not interested in this variety and that variety and this. Maybe there's a tomato that has extra vitamin C, or tomato that maybe doesn't ship well, but it's got kind of an unusual flavor. You think they're interested in that? What percentage of fruit and vegetables do you think have disappeared since 1900? That from our ancestors, our great-grandparents or whatever brought over from Italy or France or from Mexico. How much do you think is available still left from 1900? 4%. Okay, so National Academy of Sciences, a pretty prestigious scientific organization. So this is what they say about GMOs, one of the quotes. To date, no adverse health effects attributed to genetic engineering have been documented in the human population. So that's what they say. And this is the quote you see in New York Times or Time Magazine or any of the major media. And this is pretty much what people think is, because they did say this, and I understand that. But they also said a few other things. There remain sizable gaps in our ability to identify compositional changes that result from the genetic modification of organisms intended for food, to determine the biological relevance of such changes to human health, and to devise appropriate scientific methods to predict and assess unintended adverse effects on human health. Have you ever seen that? This is what they said. Now, how about this? Given the possibility that food with unintended changes may enter the marketplace, despite pre-market safety mechanisms, post-market surveillance of exposures and effects is needed. Has that occurred? But you're eating that food every day. We've been eating it for 25 years, 30 years, in the late 80s. So we're basing it on basically the data that Monsanto supplies. That's what the food safety is for our food system. Something's wrong with that. Rachel Carson warned us about this. They tried to demonize her and said she was this horrible person, and really to understand any scientists that stand up to these companies, they destroy their careers. And there's multiple scientists on a global basis. So people really need to understand what we're dealing with. They're not interested in the facts. They're not interested in having a discussion or debate. They're interested in their answer alone. And what I'm sharing here today, don't believe what I'm sharing. Just take the information and learn for yourself. Prince Charles wrote this. This was in the 1980s. There's no doubt that over the last few years, a growing anxiety has developed among all sections of the community of the consequences of modern intense farming methods. It is increasingly felt by members of the public that large-scale soil erosion, destruction of wildlife habitat, the excessive use of chemicals cannot continue unabated without ruining the countryside. And he's been a big champion of soil health and organics. So the German beer industry, I'm going to go over some of these slides a little fast. They found Roundup in every sample they tried. And they're finding now that smaller amounts of Roundup actually is more toxic than greater amounts. Because of it's a very complex, this whole, how these petrochemicals and how they interact with our bodies. And you also know when they do studies with chemicals for safety, they do one thing. They say, okay, here's one herbicide, and how does it impact our health? Do you think they ever do a study when they take that one chemical and then another one and another one? They only do it in isolation. Do we live in an isolated world? They even found it in all the California wines, including the organic wines made from organic grapes. They found Roundup in it. In my view, Roundup is going to be like asbestos. So this is a kind of an intense graphic here. Will our industrial model end up killing Mother Nature in a rush to consume her? And that's really what we're looking at. Are we going to destroy what gives us, Mother Earth, what gives us, the oxygen that gives us the food that nurtures us? Are we just in our brilliant rush and our advanced civilization, with technology, are we going to destroy what gives us life? And right now it can be a little bleak when you look out there. The way compared to when I grew up in the '60s. Imagine what it was like 150 years ago and what we've changed. But nature can be very resilient, and I always like to say that sometimes we don't necessarily know, we don't have all the information. So logically we can say things look a little bleak, but sometimes things can happen, and that's one thing, kind of metaphor for my life. When I was 9 years old, my dad took me to a Laker game, and Jerry West they were like down by a couple points. He hit the 63-foot shot to send the game into overtime. It was like no one had ever done a 63-foot shot to go into to tie the basketball game. I thought my dad thought, oh, let's leave. We're going to lose. Lakers are going to lose. But that was like a miracle shot. So I always hope that we can. Sometimes things can happen. And make a difference you're not expected. Talking a little more about the mixture of common chemicals can trigger cancer. And this is from my friend Robin O'Brien. She's a great speaker about allergies and food, and she was a Wall Street analyst, conservative from Texas, and her kids started getting allergies. So she's become like the mom, representing mom's interests. All over the country. Great speaker. And parenthood has changed. It's Generation RX. 1 in 13 kids has food allergies. Do you know every 6 minutes someone's rushed to the hospital in America today for a food allergy, life-threatening? 1 in 68 U.S. children has autism. 1 in 48 boys. Autism in the 1970s and 80s was 1 in 15,000. How did it go from 1 in 15,000 to 1 in 68 in 35 years? Genetics? Think genetics changed that fast? And there's even people who are doctors and scientific professionals that say we didn't have the right data before. We weren't keeping track of it, and now we have better monitoring. Can you believe that? So something's going on. So imagine at 1 in 45 boys, 2.5% of the male population in America today, the babies, is going to have constant care for the rest of their life. What's that going to do to our economic system where 2.5% of the men have to have constant care? And that's what it is today. If you look at a graph, it's like this. The autistic is like this. In 10 years, it'll be 1 out of 10 boys will be autistic. And if it continues on for long enough, it could be off the charts. And that's why I'm such a critic of science and medicine today, is where is the National Academy of Sciences? Where is UC Davis, the top researchers? Where is Harvard? Where are all these universities and doctors going, what is going on? Why are we not researching into what is the cause? Don't you think that's kind of ironic? I mean, this is a huge crisis, and yet they don't want to ask the question, because if we delve into it, just imagine what that answer might be. And if that answer is that it's involved in other environmental impacts, then that causes us to have to change how we live. And it's going to impact Wall Street intensely. 1 in 13 has asthma. So like 1 out of 3 people have either, kids have allergies, asthma, ADHD, or autism. Like, I don't know about you, when I grew up in the 60s and 70s, nobody had a peanut allergy. You bring peanuts to school. So what's all that about? What's the reaction? What's going on? Why is it that there's such a gluten intolerance? And so there's something that's going on, environmental in our food system, something, and we don't really know. And doctors will say that the amount of digestive disorders in people in their 30s is just off the charts. They never used to see this. So, what is the link between autism and the environment? And that's really an important question. Now, here's a professor at UC Davis from the Mind Institute. It's time to start looking for the environmental culprits responsible for the remarkable increase in the rate of autism in California. And she said that over 10 years ago, or 8 years ago. Do you think the state of California or UC Davis is focusing on that? You know, unfortunately, we've allowed our universities, where the majority of the funding of universities comes from large corporations. A department chair, does a department chair really want to focus in on this? What's that going to do to their career? What's the perception going to be there? And it's also very complex, right? These are not easy things. It's not like you can just go, oh, let's just do a little study and figure it out right away, right? These are complex things. But we really need to be looking at this. So let's talk about oceans, one of my great loves. I mean, the ocean is so dynamic, and I love swimming in the ocean and watching the ocean. I just bought some 20 acres of land that sits up high in a mountain overlooking the Pacific Ocean, and at a particular time the day or week, I can actually hear the ocean waves, on my land, and so that's really fulfilling for me to be able to do that. But also, I look out on the ocean and I go, the oceans are in trouble, and we're an ocean planet. So 250 million years ago, the oceans became so acidic that 90% of all the marine life disappeared. Look at this. Coral, bleaching. Anybody read about the Great Barrier Reef, where 90% of it's been just bleached out? Just a massive event in this last few months. So we can have vibrant ocean life, or we can have a biologically barren. And when we go to 450 parts per million and more temperature, it's going to get worse. So the oceans are warming at an increasing faster rate. So they're getting warmer and they're getting more acidic. The ocean waters absorb more than 90% of the excess heat and nearly 30% of the carbon dioxide. So the oceans can't take a lot more, which means as we start approaching more CO2 in the environment, it's going to accelerate the heat changes. So the oceans are giving us a break, but they can only take so much. At a certain point, then we're going to have to deal with what we've done as a society, as a collective experiment, this human experiment on this planet. Since the Industrial Revolution, the ocean pH has fallen by 0.1%. It's actually not acidic. It's alkaline, but going towards the acidic scale. And this is from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So this is a very powerful stat I just found out a few months ago. I encourage people to Google ocean acidification and learn more about it. Shows that phytoplankton stocks in the Indian Ocean fell by an alarming 30% in the last 16 years. Where do you think we get 2/3 of our oxygen supply from? The ocean. So our oxygen supply is being degraded. Anybody seen this graphic before? So this was last year. Let me just see if there's a pointer. I was saying I live right about right there. There's actually a dog that died in the river by consuming. This is a toxic algae bloom. This is like 10 times bigger than California. The scientists have never seen this going on. Just this massive wave. Combination from the heat and the ocean acidification. And El Nino had an impact on it also. Patterns come and go. It's impacting acidification from seashells. Seashells are having a hard time forming. It's really hurting oyster hatcheries. So this is a temperature mat. This is also kind of a wake-up call. And if you notice the blue off the North Atlantic. So this was from last summer, last June, the warmest record. So you can see a lot of warm records across the planet. But notice on the North Atlantic, there's the blue spots, and where the water is melting from Greenland, all this fresh water, it's coming along, and there's this giant sponge off the North Atlantic. And it's where, as the water absorbs, it just, in this giant sponge, it just kind of, it's this resting place for it. And Woods Hole Research Laboratory has shown that once that sponge fills up, there's going to be a significant change. And that sponge is starting to fill up because the salt water is buoyant and floats and the fresh water doesn't. And so once that fresh water doesn't have a place from melting the Greenland to go into this giant, huge area, it's going to start changing the way the currents flow all over from the Gulf of Mexico, bringing up those warm currents, up across, the eastern seaboard, and then over to Spain and England. And remember, I think it was last year, we had massive amounts of snow in Boston. So one of the predictions is that Boston will become like Fairbanks, Alaska, because it's not necessarily going to get hotter. It's going to get really cold in the wintertime because we're going to throw off the equilibrium. So it's interesting to follow that. And in Greenland, there's just rivers all over Greenland right now, just underneath. It's just melting very rapidly. So this is from the chief scientist at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Oceans and coastal waters around the world tell a disturbing story. The seas, like a sponge, are absorbing increasing amounts of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, so much so that the chemical balance of our oceans and coastal waters is changing and a growing threat to our marine ecosystems. This was published in the New York Times about 4 months ago. So that was good to see that usually the New York Times pretty much doesn't cover ocean acidification at all, or carbon sequestration like they'll do something on pasture-based meat, but they don't mention actually the climate benefits on it. For whatever reason, we need more people to connect with them. I don't know if it's a conspiracy, but but I was like, yeah, now they're actually putting this in the paper of record. Okay, so that's some progress. But we are destroying our marine ecosystems. So we want to try to imagine a healthy ocean. If we're going to go somewhere, you need to imagine it. And Bucky Fuller says, we're on his great quote, we're on a spaceship, a beautiful one. And the question is, how do we make the spaceship work? So imagine if you were on a spaceship flying through Earth, which we are, and someone came to you and said, the way we're growing our food is impacting our oxygen tanks on the spaceship. What would you do? Exactly. And that's what we need to do. And how are we going to make this work? Well, we have the soil story, and this is in Paris at the climate talks, and it was an art installation that was supposed to happen all underneath there, but then with that bombing that happened, it got changed around a little, and Gunnar is part of this project with the soil story. We're actually going to do a movie called Kiss the Ground, we're going to release next year, about this whole issue around soils and climate, etc. And the soil story is that simple idea that we can take that carbon, we can put it into the ground. And so in France adopted a plan around the soil story, and Germany adopted. So countries are getting involved. The US government, the USDA was like 50 feet away from the French installation, and when they gave the announcement, they didn't even send one person over there. So we got to change up Washington D.C. if we're going to create a better world here. So in looking at all this, we need to become more in balance with nature, spend more time in nature, get inspired by nature. I try to do that as much as I am too much on my phone and computers and following social media and dealing with the issues of being CEO of the company. I found this quote from Thoreau is, pursue some path, however narrow and crooked, in which you can walk with love and reverence. And the more we love something, the more we connect with it, the more we want to take care of it. If you're interested in learning some of the work that I do, you can. There's a great article, Why Are Climate Groups Only Focused on 50% of the Solution? Also, the slide share, and this slides I'm going to put up on there as well. And you can follow me on Facebook, and also my website, John Roulac. And as you head out, into the next days, and you think about where you're going. You look. This is a great symbol of looking out into nature and what's important and how do we enjoy this time. This wonderful time we have on Earth, and there's lots of as much of there's the challenges and problems, there's also the simple beauties in life, and we need to honor that and enjoy that. And that's kind of my practice is, how do I do that with all the information and things that I work on the challenges of the environment and what's going wrong, but also what's going right, and create that balance. And ultimately, whether we're going to be able to reverse this situation is a big challenge. And I like to say, if we have a window of 5 to 10 years to really we need to have a society focused on this, not just like it be a plank of some environmentalists. And if we don't, that we're going to start getting the feedback from the climate change, and that by 2060, in my view, 90% of all species on the planet will exit. And it's not like a 2100 where we're going to, like the scientists say, like, oh, well, the oceans will rise 2 or 3 feet, and we'll have to deal with that. But because once you lose the oceans, and already they predict by 2040, I think 5 or 6, National Geographic, that radical publication, now owned by Rupert Murdoch, says there won't be one fish in the sea by 2046. One fish. So if we don't have any fish, we don't have any plankton, that means 2/3 of our oxygen. So all of us who like to breathe, we better take care of the soils, because they're going to take care of the oceans. And it's just a simple observation of nature. We can put that in the soil. Scientists are working on it. There's a lot of good things, a lot of momentum on this. But it's a big challenge, and it's really, solar and wind isn't going to be the only solution. Those are important. We got to do all that, but we need to include soils, and encourage all of you to be advocates for that, and spread the word, and create a healthier planet. Thank you for your time. So we'll take a few questions.
So Jonathan Patz, Director of the Global Health Institute, the UW-Madison. Wonderful presentation. Regarding the way that we are just funding soy and corn, U.S. Farm Bill, unless we have, as you said, some sort of major shift in government, is there any hope in having incremental change, subsidies for fruits and vegetables, perennials, more sustainable type of crops, or is it going to be more like companies like your company and others that show that there's profit and sustainability in an alternative way of agriculture?
Yeah, well, good question. Well, the good news is General Mills has announced that they want to double organic acres in America in the next 5 to 10 years. So that's what one company is doing. But yeah, corn and soybean is, it's a very dysfunctional system, and we need to move beyond that. But it's hard to fight that in Congress. So we need to work at it on the edges. We need more political, and I'm of one that still holds out a potential that Bernie can win in California, and because Bernie will change the food system, and in my view, Hillary will maybe do some, but I don't know to what degree. But then we have to be hopeful that maybe if she gets in there, maybe she'll do something. But her track record and the Clinton support of Monsanto doesn't give me a warm feeling about that. She's very pro GMOs and agrochemicals. But we got to just do what we can. But cover crops, getting more cover crops, getting farmers to grow cover crops. So even if they're going to grow corn and soy, they grow cover crops in between and diversify. And that's one of the reasons we're trying to bring hemp. So we need more crops, not just corn, soybeans. We need to grow multiple crops like that. So. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Bob Jesse. You mentioned 7 billion people going on 8 billion people. I'm curious your thoughts about an ideal carrying capacity of the planet / spaceship.
That's an interesting question. I don't know if I can give you a great answer on that. I think I think the amount of population is it's a strain on the system, and if we all want to live like in a modern with iPhones and cars and things, I think having 7 billion people with cars and iPhones and not recycling and throwaway society is not going to be possible. But that's probably a complex answer, but maybe we can talk about it later. One more? Okay.
Yes, I was in the entomology department in Berkeley in the late 60s, and a guy named Vanden Bosch was the head of the biological control division, and he had testified in Washington, D.C. on behalf of Cesar Chavez's farm workers because they were spraying these organophosphate insecticides right on the farm workers, and they were getting ill. And Vanden Bosch got a visit from the cotton growers not too long after that, making it rather clear that's why he was losing his huge research grant from them because of his testimony. But could you say something about the loss of the microbes in the soil? I heard some figure some time ago what Roundup is doing to that, things like the bacteria and the fungi and so on.
Yeah, good question. And it is. There's a whole litany of people who've had their careers shortened because of industrial ag. In terms of microbes, yeah, when you spray Roundup or other chemicals, it reduces the earthworms, and when earthworms, you reduce that, all the fungi and bacteria. So we either need to look at soil as a living system where we add more organic matter, and we need to take farmers who spray like 10 or 8, let's say, pesticides, fungicides, and get them down to 1 or 2. So we don't necessarily, everybody has to go organic right away, but we just need to work with farmers where they're at, and we can do that. There's groups that can work on that, but when we spray a lot of pesticides and herbicides, it impacts the fungi, the bacteria, the earthworms. So you bring up a good point, and we need to have that soil living so we can take that carbon and have the ability to sequester the carbon. So I think that's it, and for the questions, and thanks again for your time.